Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Ben Backus.
And I'm Kevin Paulin, and welcome to the Falling Up Podcast, where we have conversations about turning obstacles into opportunities. And on today's show, we got the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Janet Garcia Hallett.
Dr. Garcia Hallett is the Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice at the University of New Haven, and she recently wrote her first book, Invisible Mothers, Unseen Yet Hypervisible After Incarceration, which is a book based on interviews she conducted with 37 mothers in New York City. And she really does a great job of highlighting their experience in motherhood post-incarceration.
So without further ado, welcome to the Falling Up Podcast.
I think we have a lot to cover tonight. You good to jump on in?
I'm good. I've been waiting for this.
It sounds like the majority of your career has been centered around criminal justice in the human service field. So I like to always start with finding a quote that somewhat seems to ring true to the guest that we're speaking with. And Angela Davis eloquently stated, "Prisons do not disappear social problems. They disappear human beings. Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, and illiteracy are only a few of the problems that disappear from public view when the human being contending with them are relegated to cages." If you could make one change to the criminal justice system to truly shift the focus to rehabilitation rather than retribution, what would it be?
I think this goes into the conversation that we hear right now so often in terms of defunding the police. And funny enough, I'm just talking about this with my students this week because there's this big conversation about police reform versus defunding the police and what that really means. And I think that's important. And really understanding what it means. So not just taking money away and leaving it to go into another form of a system that fuels mass incarceration, but really putting that, reallocating that money into the community in a different capacity. So a number of people that are involved in the system are in the system because of mental health barriers, substance use issues. So when there are individuals in the community who are battling with a substance use issue or battling with a mental illness episode, being able to call another resource other than police officers. So some cities are using 311 as a service to call when someone actually needs help or needs service, instead of thinking of the police as the only form of help that someone can potentially get, which increases the risk of things escalating when it really wasn't a violent issue to begin with. So I think that's very important for people to understand that it's a possibility that we could actually provide help to those who are in need instead of introducing individuals who are not trained to provide that type of support, right? So I think that conversation is very important, and I'm all for defunding the police and reallocating those resources into community-based support to address some of the underlying issues and why we see so many people in our prison system. So that's what I would say.
That's a great answer.
So being able to take, it's almost a more logical approach, right? Instead of taking this pure, because police officers, at least from my perspective, I'm always going to relate them to something punitive, right? Not necessarily supporting, although I'm sure they're, in many cases, depending on the situation, it can be seen as a support. But I don't know. Have you, how do you view, my gut reaction, I hear police and I think punitive. And I don't know if that is accurate or if I should change the way I see that. But just from the way it's portrayed in the media, from hearing and having my own experiences, right? Having our experiences, there's nothing supporting about that, right?
Correct.
So it makes sense to, instead of approaching it from, even if it's not accurate, there is this stigma here. And in addition to maybe changing that stigma, being able to provide individuals who actually can deal with mental health issues or understand how to relate to someone who's really suffering. Because ultimately that's what that person is, right? In those moments, they're experiencing extreme suffering.
Yeah. Exactly. And you make a good point in terms of how we come to understand people's roles and how we come to understand the system to begin with, right? People view prison as the end all be all. Somebody did something, locked them up, throw away the key, that's it. But really understanding what led to that situation to begin with. Is that really the best situation for this person in the circumstances? What is happening after release, right? What is happening during the time that they're there? If nothing changes, if the barriers are still there when they get out, what change? What? Why do you expect something to be better? Um, and that's another conversation about the prison system and incarceration. But um, the fact that the public believes the prison system is a solution for community issues is the problem, right? We focus so much on just lock them up, throw away the key. They don't deserve certain foods. They don't deserve to get time out. They don't deserve to get access to work release. And it's so punitive as a whole, and people just kind of grow into believing that that is the best situation until they learn about the stories, until they learn about the reality about people's experiences behind bars and the barriers that people face when they get out, that the underlying issues was never tapped into, was never addressed. So yeah.
So I'm really excited to jump into the book and hear the stories, because it sounds like the book is all about sharing these voices, right?
Yes.
Before we do that, I just want to be able to set the stage and take a step back. What is the goal of the criminal justice system, and then what actually happens in the criminal justice system? Does that make sense? Because I think the goal, it's kind of like an idea versus reality, right? Like we have this beautiful idea of what this can be, and then we have what it actually is. So if we just take a step back and try to all be on the same page, like what is the goal of the criminal justice system?
I don't know if there's a beautiful goal of the criminal justice system. I think the goal of the prison system is merely to confine individuals who've been viewed as doing some form of wrongdoing, and that's very broad. Usually when people talk about those who are incarcerated, they bring up serial killers, and they bring up those who are the most stigmatized in terms of certain crimes against children, or certain crimes or offenses that revolve around sexual activity and things like that. But the majority of who we see in the prison system, that's not the majority of who we see in the prison system.
That represents a minute statistic.
Exactly.
Right? Like we're talking about the less than 5%.
But it's always what people focus on, whether it's the media, public conversation, anything to combat any action to move forward in a better place for everyone who's actually impacted. And so in terms of my book, I wanted to highlight that although most of the discussion revolves around men, because men make up most of the individuals who are in the prison system, women are also impacted as well. So this kind of goes back into what I was involved in when I was in college. I was involved in a program called Correctional Association of New York in Harlem at the time. I was surrounded by women who had been through the system. And they would be there with their children. They were mothers, speaking about their experiences in the prison system. And then going to school and listening to the media and watching the news, it was always illustrations and discussions about men of color and how they're not involved in their children's life, and they need to learn how to parent. And the discussion was focused around men. And here I was in the program and meeting so many women and so many mothers who had also been incarcerated, but they weren't included in the discussion about who mass incarceration was impacting. And then being more involved in kind of nonprofits and organizations devoted to helping people when they get out, mostly focused on men too. So down to the type of jobs that were presented as felony friendly and everything, kind of catered to a certain population, and the women felt like they weren't really getting the same amount of support as other individuals. So I was surrounded by women who felt like they were constantly ignored and forgotten, and some of the efforts that were kind of increasingly coming about to support individuals who were impacted, and I wanted to focus on their narratives. when the focus was on women, it was often on like how much harm to the children that they decided to do something that was deemed as a crime and taken away from their children. So it was very punitive. How could she? How could she do that and be away from the children? Did she not think about the children? Very rarely did it focus on the women's narratives, the mother's narratives, and kind of their story and how things kind of unfolded the way they did. So I wanted to kind of share their narratives.
There's so much beauty to that because it's this human narrative, right? Like we look, if you look at an outcome and you only focus on the outcome, you're missing the entire process, right? And all of us are a product of our experiences. And we don't get to choose what families we're born into, what neighborhoods we're born into, what our surroundings are. And there's so much luck to this thing called life, right? Mm-hmm. If I am raised in a situation where I'm seeing specific types of behaviors all day long, do I know that there's another way to live? And unless I meet someone who I'm attracted to and want what they have, how are my eyes going to be open to this other way? So I'm really curious to hear how you got into it, because it sounds like you were able to find a way out of a challenging situation growing up. And that's just based off what I've read. So I'm really excited to hear the actual story.
Yeah. So I say this all the time. I grew up in Harlem, and we know Harlem was hard hit by the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. It'll be to a point, you can see people under the influence. You can see kind of needles and vials on the way to school. It was kind of a norm. I didn't understand that it shouldn't have been that way because I was just kind of accustomed to seeing certain things growing up. And down to like other classmates in elementary and middle school, and that their parents kind of being affected by substance use. And my elementary school was Family Academy. I talk about it all the time. And Family Academy was really a family. So down to the principal, allowing parents to come in and use a phone if they needed to kind of try to get a job, right? To them driving us home if the Bloods were kind of out and about doing their thing on Halloween, right? And we needed to get home safely if we were wearing red.
Yeah. Mischief night and all that.
Yeah. So a lot of people were wearing red, so they made sure we got home safely. They would literally just drive us 2 blocks down and make sure we were okay. And kind of just the support of, we live in an apartment building, so the support of people in our own building to help one another. All right, you won't be home yet? Like, I'll take care of your kids. Don't worry about it. I got them. So there was a lot going on that I did notice at the time, and I thought it was a norm because that's all I really saw. I didn't know anything else. And then I talk about this in the book. When I started seeing missing faces, the assumption was like, okay, maybe they're getting help, or maybe they're in a program or something, kind of thinking the best that they got the help that they needed. And I just started hearing more, no, like that person's like locked up. So not that they were getting help, just that they were confined behind bars. Mm-hmm. And I increasingly started to get an interest in like, what's the situation that people were getting like locked up for having a problem with substance use, and not really getting the program support that they actually needed, especially when you see someone who, was well-dressed, who had a job as a nurse, and then you kind of see them kind of dwindle down with the effect of substance use. It's hard to kind of see that progression, and
fast too.
I was just about to say that, and see it happen so fast. Down to people in your own apartment building who live right across from you. Like, you can see the progression, see it happen really very quickly. So I just thought it was a disconnect between the need and what was actually being done on a larger systemic issue. And I decided I wanted to study criminal justice. First, I was more interested in like forensic psychology, and I realized it took approach that I was just like, no, this is not all psychological. Like, the system is wrong. Like, we have to focus on why we're messing up and people are getting to this point because we didn't do what was right by these people to begin with. So then I really focused on criminal justice and studying criminal justice issues, and Correctional Association, hands down, was my first kind of foot in the door in terms of working to repeal the Rockefeller drug laws in New York and meeting people who had also been impacted, who I didn't have a personal connection to, and hearing their stories behind bars and whatnot, and what their experiences were like. And from there, everything I did was involved in some type of nonprofit that worked to support individuals in the system.
Can you speak to the Rockefeller drug laws really quick, just for those who are not familiar?
So it just looks at how just the smallest amount of crack cocaine can result in such a large sentence for individuals compared to powder cocaine. And that in and of itself resulted in a lot of disparities for people of color in the prison system, and some people believe like, oh, people of color use drugs more than white, and in reality, that is absolutely not the case. There's some research that says white individuals use more substances. There's other research that say about the same, but who's being incarcerated more for possession?
And just to throw this out, that crack cocaine and powder cocaine are fundamentally the same substance. Right? Like salt is the only molecule difference in powder cocaine and crack cocaine.
Still a stimulant.
Yeah.
But disparity in the drug laws.
Just wanted to float that out, and thank you for touching on that, just because I think it's fascinating, and it speaks to, in so many times, right, drugs are my passion. It's something that I've specialized in, and just really enjoy learning about and knowing our history. And right, we have this war on drugs, but it really is a war on race. And you can see it with, you can trace it back with cocaine and black individuals, with opiates and Chinese individuals, with cannabis and Mexican individuals, right? Like you can see all of these different things. And it's just a really, it's really sad to look at the narrative that is out now and where that comes from.
Well, the thing, and this goes back to when you were talking about the goal of the criminal justice system and what it actually does. The goal and what it actually does is the same. Like that's why I 100% agree with you with defunding the police. Police reform. You can't reform something that ain't broke. 13th Amendment. It's slavery. It's slavery. So how am I fixing slavery? It's slavery. I just had a conversation with somebody about the Jerry Jones thing, and his involvement with the Little Rock and Arkansas and all that. And he was and the gentleman was just saying everything changed. It's not the same as it was 6 years ago. Give this guy grace. And I said, well, it's not about giving Jerry Jones grace. It's understanding that nothing did change. It's still slavery. The 13th Amendment. I was locked up 4 years. I was a property of the state. That's not a myth. You know what I mean? That's the facts. So I always say that, like with Department of Corrections, systematic oppression, whatever, criminal justice system, all that shit's the same. And it's just having that awareness that this is a system that is made to do exactly what it does. You know what I mean? So
most people don't know that about the 13th Amendment.
Oh
either.
Yeah,
They're like, what? Involuntary servitude and slavery? It's okay as long as it's as punishment for a crime? Mind blown. Yeah.
Like, it's literally the law of the land.
It's literally in there.
But it's great. It's spooky how many people don't know that.
Yeah.
Well, and then you add in the profitability of it, right? And doing all the research with Winning Ways and finding out that I think it was between 1995 and 2005, a new prison opened every 10 days in the United States.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, I remember that.
How many businesses open every 10 days in the United States, right? And to think of all the
that's
money.
A guaranteed success. Though.
That's a guaranteed success. That is a guaranteed moneymaker day in, day out.
As long as you open them, they're going to fill up.
Right.
Oh, you're going to find a way to fill it up.
Oh, yeah.
And they're privatized, right? So it's interesting. That's kind of why I wanted to start with what is the societal goal of the criminal justice system versus what it can become. Because ultimately, and I think we'll get into it as we explore the book a little bit, it sounds like the voices are hopefully voices of hope, right? And also voices of what could have been, what was, all of these different things. But the idea is, I think there's ways to learn from your experience. There's ways to learn from your experience, and how can we begin to create a message of change, create a message of hope, instill that just because on your worst day you got caught doesn't mean that that is your life, right? Like I think of the amount of things that I've done in my life that I just didn't get caught, right? And how many people can say that? All of us, we're humans, we fuck up, right? Some bigger than others, but does that mean that we don't have a shot at creating a life worth meaning and creating a life worth giving and of service and using our experiences like you have to be able to give back to those who were once in our shoes, right?
Well, that's the magic trick, right?
I hope, man.
That's the cheat code, you know?
So sorry for that tangent. I went down a side street, but to come back. So you get into this field very much based off your life experiences growing up, and it sounds like your curiosity and compassion for humankind.
Yeah. I mean, and I also, so that was just me growing up and seeing a lot of in my community. But also as I got older, I started losing a lot of people. So it was growing up is seeing a lot of people under the influence of substances. And then maybe once I hit high school, it was almost like every semester, every academic year, I was losing another friend who I grew up with. And I was like, this is different. Yeah. So it went from kind of seeing the substance use to then having friends who were killed over nonsense. Yeah. So it became like very personal. Like I wouldn't understand what's going on and how we can fix this, because I also don't want to see my friends now getting locked up either. And I know what was going on. Like I was there when we were growing up together. I saw like the underlying issues that I want to always highlight, and that the prison system is still not going to help them, right? So, yeah.
How were you able to cope with those losses?
That's a good question. I don't know. It was difficult. So again, with Family Academy, I'm still in contact with my elementary school principal. I'm still in contact with a lot of people from elementary and middle school because we're that much as a family. And whenever someone was killed or committed suicide or was locked up, it was like I was the one kind of informing everyone, like, this is what happened, just be there for the family, hear the details about the funeral, just come out and be a support. So I was the one that would organize our annual reunion at the park that was free. And so I kind of had a responsibility in a way to keep everyone together, which was nice, but it was also taxing, to be honest. To be the one to send out those messages, and then everyone's asking me questions like what happened and whatnot. And then I'm still in school, so I'm going to school in all black, and people are like, why are you wearing all black in the summertime? It's too hot for that. And I'm like, well, I just came from a funeral, and then just silence. People would not know what to say in response to that, right? They think it's just funny that I'm wearing all black and dressed up in the summertime. When they know it was like not my usual attire. Well, I happen to be wearing it.
No, you got the you got the blazer. You good? You got the blazer.
and then they just wouldn't know how to respond to that. It was just they were blown away. They weren't accustomed to maybe going to funerals at a young age, especially for someone. Like for the situations that would happen, like someone shot in the head on their birthday, or someone under the influence of substances and hung herself, or, it was just a number of things. Someone stabbed to death after a fight. Like, it was just a lot of extreme situations that seemed like it would just happen so often or so frequently. Into grad school, and I had somebody make a comment one time, like, what kind of friends do you have? Just after knowing that I had been to a funeral almost each semester that first year. And at that point, I stopped just sharing anything that, that I went through or what happened to my friends, because I realized people just would not understand. It was a judgment about the person and their character and not the broader circumstances, because they just didn't understand. Right. And at that point, I didn't feel like it was my job to kind of teach them. I already was dealing with my own issues. I just let it be. And if anything, it was kind of like more motivation to be that support network for the group of people like in my community to kind of help others and show like there's a different way to do this. Here's like some opportunities, blah blah blah. And to this day I still share when someone passes or when something happens. That just happened last week, so it wasn't the same type of situation, but I'm still kind of that person to share news. Um, so it's taxing. I don't always show at funerals because it can be taxing. Um, but I think of it as a way to keep doing the work that I'm doing, like have some involvement, and realize that it can benefit someone. So,
So you cope through being of service.
Yeah.
absolutely.
There
How
seems like
beautiful
a
is
cheat
that?
code. Yeah, and it's this. While you were saying that, I was just thinking how in life there's always the yin and the yang, the two sides of the coin, right? Where it's like, hey, I cope by being of service, but in the same breath, too much service equals burnout. And where is that balance?
Right.
Yeah.
But a lesson I think that was really helpful to me was just learning if you stay to your roots, you never have to leave. Right? Like you can do all of these things, but if you come back to the basic, you never have to do the basic. And there's something really powerful in that. And that's what I hear in your message is like, hey, I've gone on this incredible journey in academia, published author, yet at the core, I'm still this person who's here for my community.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
And the thing is also important to know, like, what the underlying thing that's keeping you motivated, right? If it's, especially when it's something personal, it's like even when it's hard, like you're motivated to keep doing a job because you know you're having an impact on other people. So I always like tell my students, I'm like, find what really like deep down motivate. Like, what do you really want to do? Not just because like it runs in your family. What do you want to do? What's meaningful for you? Because when times are rough, you're gonna need to dig in deep and push yourself, and you need something that's meaningful for you, impactful for you, to keep pushing forward.
So that's, oh, I'm sorry, bro, but that is the greatest segue into something I'm actually really, really curious about. So I want to get into the book, but before we actually get into the book, I want to get into the process. So there's no doubt that sitting there writing a book, the amount of time where it was probably like, fuck it, I give up, I can't do this. I can imagine just being a human that happened over and over, yet you came back to it and you completed the process. So take me to the beginning. First, what sparked your interest and desire to take on that burden? And I say that very lightly, right? Because it is a process. So what made you want to do that? And then can you just share how you had kind of this fortitude to continue to push forward when inevitably I'm sure there was times where it was like, why am I doing this? I want to throw in the towel.
Man, was it a process? Yes. So I
And
actually
before you start, can you share the name
yes
of the book? Because we haven't said that yet.
That we have.
I think that's important.
We will in the intro.
Okay. Well, we will. Yes, you're right.
So the book is called Invisible Mothers, Unseen Yet Hypervisible After Incarceration. So I told you a little bit about like why I wanted to focus on mothers' stories and mothers' narratives. And I was thinking about this when I was in grad school. I was in a PhD program at Rutgers, and it came time to work on my dissertation. And I actually had another topic in mind, but I was really like, I'm not as passionate about this topic as I am about the women's stories and the mother stories who I've been meeting over these past few years in New York in these nonprofit organizations. So I went with my gut. I went what I was most passionate about, and it was with sharing their narratives. Especially because throughout my studies, throughout the whole PhD program, the focus was always on men. And nothing about men, but I just wanted to really focus on the women's stories who I was meeting. I just felt like they were so ignored.
And can I just say one thing about that?
Yeah.
I'm happy you did that because they are. Like, any dude and woman that really did time knows men get more resources than women. It's just what it is, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But please continue.
And then I was thinking about, okay, exactly how am I going to do this? And I was living in New Jersey at the time, in Newark, and I knew I wanted to interview them. And I said to myself, I'll interview them wherever they feel comfortable. I knew it was going to be in New York. So whether they wanted me to go to their home, I'm going to their home. If they want me to meet with them in like a fast food restaurant, I'll meet them at a fast food. Just tell me where, and I'll meet you there. If you're in school, I'll meet you at your school. Just tell me where you want me to interview you. I want you to feel comfortable, and I'll do it. And I literally would have my MacBook right there and kind of halfway open, and I'll record it on like an application that I had on my Mac. Um, and just I would share with them. I would share about myself so they felt comfortable. And it was really so that they didn't feel like it was like some outsider really kind of chiming in and just leaving them with no purpose. Because that's another kind of negative impact of like researchers coming in and doing this type of work too, where you just ask a bunch of questions, you publish about it, and then nothing. Like you don't have any involvement with them afterwards. Um, so it took me about a year, and I specifically wanted to interview African American, West Indian, and Latina mothers, and I was literally going all throughout New York City. I didn't drive. I didn't have a car. Taking the train, it would take about 2 hours each way, and kind of sometimes things came up and people didn't show. Sometimes they were homeless, and that they would needed to go into the intake center, so they were in a completely different borough. So things would happen, and that's just kind of the reality, right? When you're coming out and things are kind of in flux, right? Things are not always kind of easy coming out. But I would meet them where they were. It took me about a year from 2014 into 2015. And as you can see, the book just came out in 2022. And at the time, I wasn't a mother myself either. So within the time that I interviewed them, I not only got married, but I had 3 kids. And a whole pandemic happened. So there were a lot of setbacks between the time that I interviewed them and the time they actually came about as a book. And throughout that time, yeah, absolutely several times, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to finish this. And this is so much harder than I thought it was. So that came out a lot. And it was also like this pressure, wanting to make sure that I'm doing a good job sharing their stories. So I have the quotes, I have everything that they said, but also presenting it in a way that their quotes aren't used against them because they're already stigmatized in society. So I also feel like there was a lot of, when I still do feel like there's a lot of weight on my shoulders to make sure that I'm presenting their stories and contextualizing it. So even though outsiders who already have so much stigma, like who already have these negative perceptions about them, can really sit with themselves and come to realize and really understand them. So even now to this day, I still feel like I have a lot of weight on my shoulders to kind of do right by them in their stories and their narratives. But I'm excited and nervous at the same time, even though now it's out. So even with it being out, I'm like, okay.
Well, yeah, we got to promote it and right.
Yeah.
Get it out there. How many people did you interview?
37 mothers.
37 mothers, all mothers, huh?
All mothers, 37 mothers. Yep.
37. Wow. That's a lot of
So, what were some common themes, right? Meaning, so many times when people struggle with specific things, it's kind of like, hey, if you hear one story, we all experience that. It's not about kind of the big events that took place, but the emotions that we can all relate to, right? Were there common themes throughout all 37 of these women that really stood out?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important, and it kind of ties into outsiders looking into perceptions, they really highlight, and you kind of touched upon this earlier, like what happened and maybe why they were incarcerated doesn't define who they are as a person. And there's always this discussion about like who's a bad mother and who's a good mother, what mothering looks like. And they really kind of reframe this narrative about what good mothering is supposed to look like or what good mothering even means. And that was very common to say like, oh, I'm not a bad mother. I may have made a mistake, but that doesn't define who I am as a person. Here's everything I'm trying to do. Here's everything I tried to do that just others didn't actually notice. And I'll just give some examples, like saying, oh, like you never were there for your child, like you were under the influence of substances and you couldn't even raise your child. But especially in the Black community, shared mothering is a big thing. So not just one person, kind of the equivalent of it takes a village to raise a child. So you have the auntie, you have grandma, you have sisters. They're all coming in to be that support network. And that's very much a cultural protection, right? When you have a system that's kind of in place to kind of break you down, you rely on your support network, your family support network, your community support network to be there in place. So they didn't view that as a negative thing. They view that as their cultural protection to be there in place because that's what your network is supposed to be there to do. So they gave a lot of examples of how other people were trying to define them as bad mothers was really null and void. It was not a definitive response about who they were. And they talked about reframing what's supposed to be good mothering according to these white normative middle class expectations of motherhood and focus on what they did in reality of their circumstances, both before incarceration and also after incarceration. And that was consistent across the board, I would say.
Yeah, good is such a silly term. It's just
Good
it doesn't.
to who?
Well, that's it. Like I look at, there's always a better, but good means nothing, right? There's a more effective, there's a more efficient. But when you start comparing, because again, how can you if I was raised in this way and this is all I know, and someone else is raised this way and this is all they know, how can you compare those two? Right? Like it's you just can't compare it. You can always look for a better way for each scenario. Yeah, I don't know, that word that always gets me.
How forthcoming were they with sharing their stories?
There were some mothers who, at the beginning, you can tell that they were reserved, and I completely understand that. Having meeting, some of them met me for the first time. Others I knew prior, just out and about in the community at different organizations, and that's why I shared about myself, so that I wasn't just a complete stranger to them. So I was, especially because I'm Afro-Latina, and most people just assume I'm not. So whenever I did interview someone who was Latina, then it would be like, oh, speaking in Spanglish, and then you can just kind of see the shoulders just relax a little bit. Or if I share that I'm from Harlem, and oh, my family's from here, I'm from Honduras, it's like, oh, okay, like you're not some rich middle-class person who's just coming in and asking me questions with judgment, right? So, and which is common. Nobody likes to be judged or, critiqued for anything. And I think that definitely helped in terms of our conversations. Absolutely, yeah.
That's dope.
Did you go in with any kind of preconceived notion of what you were looking for or trying to find?
So, in terms of, I'm gonna put on my professor research hat.
That's what I was waiting for.
So you really don't want to go into interviews with preconceived notions about what people are going to say, because then you're looking at things from that lens. If you go in with expectations about how somebody is going to respond to something, it's like you may ask your question a certain way, or you may kind of lead them in a way to kind of respond in the way you're thinking of. So I really had no idea how they were going to respond too, because everything here is always so focused on men too. Or focus on the children. So for most part, I have no idea how they were really going to respond. In certain cases, there was things that I didn't expect to ask that came about naturally. So I had an interest in African American, West Indian, Latina women, because I realized, at least for myself culturally, as an Afro-Latina woman, when people make assumptions about me, they think I'm African American. And culturally, like in terms of the food, in terms of the music and the dance, that's how I identify as an Afro-Latina woman, down to the dialect that my family speaks at home, right? There's certain things that are unique to how I identify that if someone only views me from a different perspective, they may not fully understand. So very broadly, I had an interest in just to see like if there would be any like nuances in that regard. And one thing that did come up as a surprise I was not expecting or I was not aware of was when I was speaking with some of the West Indian mothers, and them kind of sharing how when it came to two things, substance use and also certain offenses that were deemed as like money crimes, so doing something to get finances, like fraud or like not prostitution. So I'll give an example. One mother said that her family was more upset with her that she was engaging in activities to steal someone's identity to kind of get money, that they rather her have been a prostitute than do that because at least she's working for her finances. And that was common for the West Indian mothers. So,
Yeah.
and it was so interesting for that kind of conversation to come up that I didn't expect it. I didn't ask about that directly, but it would come up naturally in conversation in terms of family treatment to mothers, depending on the type of offense that they were incarcerated for, or if they were arrested for something and needing to lie to family in order to get some support because of how that offense was viewed compared to another one. So, and it wasn't something I asked about directly, but it naturally kind of came about as well. So that's to say I didn't go in with expectations. Just wanted to like leave it up to what they present. I did have like a standard, like what was your experience like coming back home? How did your children treat you? Things of that nature, and leaving it open ended so that they can expand how they felt comfortable, and then probing for more information. Tell me more about that. Like,
Right.
what did you say in response to that? So it's one way to kind of get more information from them and from their perspective without kind of leading them to respond in a certain way.
That was a lesson. That was class. I receive it.
1 minute I have that Harlem hat on, the next minute like the professor hat on.
Word.
So speaking of the professor hat,
Yeah.
how did you become a professor? What was that journey like? And it sounds like there wasn't a straightforward path laid out, right? Where, hey, I want to be a doctor. My dad's a doctor. I get to get all the ins and outs. I get to find the shortcuts. That type of thing. And my dad's by no means a doctor, and I'm not a doctor. So I was just arbitrarily using that example. But from your perspective, it sounds like that roadmap or those mentors weren't present from day one. How did you see the vision?
That's a good question. So my parents, for context, both my parents are from Honduras. I'm the first one born here in the States. And my father, he'll probably hate me for saying this on the podcast, but my father has an equivalent of a 5th grade education in Honduras. My mom, she worked towards getting her GED here. She was actually working on getting her GED when I was in high school, college, and grad school, and she finally got it when I was in grad school. So we celebrated that when she was in grad school. So my parents did not go to college. They did not get into a master's program. They did not get their PhD. They are absolutely not professors. And going to college, my understanding was you just go to college and you work. That's it. That's all the information I have. You're supposed to go to college. I had absolutely no idea what I was supposed to do afterwards. I knew what I was interested in, the problems of the criminal justice system, but I didn't know what I was supposed to do after college. And I had an advisor, and she asked me, what do I want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess work somewhere. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing before I graduate to find a job. And she asked me about graduate school. I'm like, what's that? Like, I just don't know about graduate school because the conversation just never came up at home. And it wasn't a common discussion. They didn't know themselves. Yeah. So she told me about a program called the McNair Program. Absolutely loved it, and it's pretty much a program to support low-income students of color who are interested in applying or interested in going into graduate school. And she told me about McNair. She told me where the office was. I went up there just to ask about the program, what it was, can I get in, and what's this graduate school thing that my advisor told me about. And I sat in that office for over an hour. And I'm still in contact with the McNair advisor now. She's a Puerto Rican woman. She had her doctorate. So she understood the cultural thing of not having a parent who went through it. And she was kind of able to break down the benefits of graduate school, different routes you can take after college. She really was the first person to break down different options. And I was actually doing a lot just out of my own interest. I was doing internships just because I was interested in being involved in these nonprofits. She's like, well, this looks good for after college. I'm like, oh, that's good to know. I didn't know that this was helpful. I was just doing what was meaningful for me, but it had like a bigger purpose that I guess jobs looked for, which I was not privy to. So she was the first person, Dr. Carol Oliver, who told me about graduate school and the kind of route into becoming a professor. And the McNair program also supports students in terms of like application fees to actually apply so that finances aren't a barrier. So that helped actually fund the applications, and they helped me like literally learn, work on the personal statement, work on how to kind of package myself for it. And I applied for both like master's programs and PhD programs. Still unsure of myself because that was another thing that was a barrier because I was always unsure of myself. Could I really do this? I don't think I can. I don't know if I'm good enough. That was always something that was kind of like in the back of my mind. I'm not sure if I'm good enough because I don't know. Like this, I don't know anyone who's done this before. Who do I go to? And I got into almost all the master's programs and PhD programs that I applied for straight out of undergrad. And most people don't know that.
PhD program straight out of undergrad.
Yes. Most people don't know you can do that. See? And you actually save money doing that too. So I actually entered my PhD program directly from my bachelor's program. So I essentially skipped that master's route and went right into a PhD program.
I would have done that, but I got rejected from every school.
Really?
Everyone.
Wow.
Cut right down.
But the McNair program was helpful because they showed me, okay, like how do I package myself? They want you to see that you can present. I'm like, okay, where do I present? So they showed me like what to do, and they also have like small presentations for undergraduate students who are doing research, and I was doing research.
How'd you find the McNair program?
There was a McNair program at Hunter College. So I went to Hunter College for undergrad at City University in New York. And they had a McNair program there. And my advisor happened to direct me to literally go upstairs and speak to the director who was there. So it's really kind of attached to the university, whether that university has a McNair program. And Hunter College did. So luckily, Dr. Oliver was so great, and she really broke everything down to me in terms of the options and to help me package myself to apply and get into the PhD program. And I was the youngest one there when I got in.
That's awesome. What's the test you have to take? The
GRE.
The GRE. That's what killed me. I didn't study really. I was not. I studied to the best of my ability at 18 or 20 years old, however old I was at the time.
I really don't like standardized exams because they don't really say how well you can do when you're there. I'm a weird one. I did great in math, but I did horrible in the reading. I have a book that came out, right? I always did horrible in the reading portions, always did better in the math for the SATs and the GREs. But one thing Dr. Oliver instructed me to do was to say that, like, the GREs are not a representation of how you will do in this program, right? And especially students of color are the ones who are most impacted by programs that focus solely on the score and how you do on GREs, unfortunately. So
this part, so, man, I'm over here just, my mind is just like, this is taking me so deep for so many different reasons. I have to unpack this very quickly. The first thing is, I'm first generation. You know, I mean, Haitian. My mother, father, born in Haiti. I'm the youngest one. And you did an awesome job with your questions, because that was a question I was going to ask, because you mentioned that on our questionnaire, and I was going to ask you, like, how did you navigate? Because that was something that my older sister, my brother, and myself, it was trial and error. We navigated everything from financial aid to everything, because my mother and my father, it's crazy. My father, too, was educated up to a certain point in Haiti. My mother had no education in Haiti, but then they came to America, and my mother now is currently going for her GED. So that's just crazy.
So similarity.
Oh, my God. So I'm just like, what? But it's so amazing. Like, shout out to the McNair program, because like it was hard for not just us, but just speaking for first generation that don't have that resource or someone that they know that's did it or gonna do it. Um, to navigate to a PhD, it was hard enough to navigate to community college, let alone, you know what I mean? So that's amazing that they got programs out there, and I think that's one of the things that that I strive to do is like always like find resources for other people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because that like wow, you know what I mean? So that's amazing because it's coming first generation. It's what they say you gotta fight twice as hard. I think I fight even harder because you know I'm growing up in a household where I'm teaching my mother and my father how to pronunciate. I'm writing checks at 8 years old. You know what I'm saying? It's wild. So I live what you live. You know what I'm saying? So
My
that's
father would call me. So my father used to be a security guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
oh yeah.
And then after he retired, he would kind of still do like side jobs as security. And they would have to like write down when certain things happen. He would call me like, "How do I write this in English? Like, how do I spell
Yeah,
this?"
yeah.
He's like, "Oh man, I made a mistake," and he would like white it out, and like correct it based on what I tell him on how to spell it. And then my mom, when she was working on her GED, she would call me like, "I'm having issues with like how to word this in English." So it's yeah, absolutely. And people, don't understand that that's something outside of school, that's something outside of work, that you're helping other family members kind of navigate what they want to do to kind of, progress and excel too.
And you don't
So.
have the like other things. You don't have the option to say no.
Oh no, you can't tell no mama no. Oh no.
You can't even think it. Your face screw up. You in trouble. You hear me? I need
no.
help. Right away, ma. Right away. Shout out to mommy. Shout out to you. But
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
Yeah. What? Immediately. Don't even fix your face. Suck your teeth. Oh my. You won't have
Oh
teeth.
no.
You won't have teeth.
Oh no.
Yeah, be biting on the apple. I remember. No. For real. No, that's really amazing though. I relate to that so much. So that's like that says a lot about you. You know what I mean? Because it ain't easy. It ain't easy. So.
I mean, it's a lot, and this is why I'm always transparent with my students too. It's a number of things. Like walking into the classroom, you see not young, a woman and a woman of color. And it's like, oh, okay. And then you tell the backstory, like, yeah, I'm from Harlem. My parents from Honduras. I'm first generation. And like, oh, like this is a possibility for someone like you or with your background to be a professor. And there's pros and cons. Some people are like, oh, you're not competent to be a professor. There's assumptions when it comes to individuals and being a professor. But I view it as allowing students to see someone that looks like them, that it's possible. And I think that's very important, especially when you have students who are coming from places that are not diverse, or when you have them in programs that are not diverse, to kind of be some form of representation and say, yeah, it's possible. And don't let anyone kind of instill these negative perceptions about what you can't or can do.
So that part, when did the switch turn? Because I remember earlier when we were talking about being in school and stop sharing losses or stop educating people on what you're going through, and then now we're in school and you're educating and being transparent and sharing everything with people that look like us, and then with people that look like Ben that ain't from Jersey or Harlem and stuff. So like, when did that change? Like when did that click?
I think when being more comfortable with being able to deal with the loss. In terms of not sharing, it was just the loss. It was literally like every semester. It's like that from our PhD program, that fall, that spring, the summer, the next fall. It was literally like, can I get a break? It was like, please. And it was just a lot. And I realized from that one comment that student who was in my cohort, we came in at the same time, that she mentioned, I'm like, you don't get it. And I took it as a way to just deal with it at the time and as a way to protect myself. But now I'm like, I'm just going to tell you about yourself. I'm going to tell you about yourself and tell you why what you said is problematic, because that is how people learn. But it did take me a while to get to the place where I was comfortable always teaching people, even in those moments where it was like outside of a classroom. And now I do that unapologetically. So I think over time and being more confident in me being here, especially when there's definitely a gender, there's definitely a racialized aspect of it when you're going through a PhD program. I was also young. So again, with the self-doubt and everything that I mentioned, and then kind of proving people wrong. So getting the awards, getting the publications, getting recognized for the work that you're doing and saying, no, like, I do belong here. And I worked my ass off to be here. And what I do speaks for itself. So now I'm going to teach you about yourself.
Yeah,
I'm gonna school you really quickly. So it took me getting to that point to be able to, I guess, confidently and unapologetically speak up when somebody said something that was very offensive and very discriminatory.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Reading your questionnaire and now having the pleasure to spend time with you, it goes back to you're a person of service. That's how you cope. And one thing, and this all hit me just now. One thing Ben will always say is there's people out there that dedicate their whole life for one topic, and then we have the pleasure of grabbing the book and then reading the book of that person's whole life work, right? And that's to sit here with someone that's done that or is doing that, and for a topic that's so passionate to me, that's just like amazing. Then see someone that look like me that's been through what I've been through, and I'm just thankful and grateful that you came today and shared this, because it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me. There's people out here fighting the fight, and you're out here being of service and changing people's perspective. Everyone that might have the stigma or this thought of who you are, by the end of the conversation, it should be different. If it ain't, that's on them. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I appreciate that, and continue to be unapologetic and continue to stand up for us, because that's we need you. You know what I mean?
I appreciate that.
No doubt.
So where can people find you? Where can people find your book? Where can people get access to all of this knowledge?
Yeah, so I created my own website, which I'm very proud of. It took a long time.
It's very good.
Did you see it?
Yeah, it's good.
It took me a long time, so I'm not as tech savvy. But my website is Garcia Hallett, HALLETT, 2 L's, 2 T's, .com. And the book can be purchased on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, University of California Press. And so all those links are on my website as well for Invisible Mothers.
Awesome. Any social media, anything like that people can find you on?
I am on Instagram and Twitter. The same thing as my website, Garcia Hallett.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as Kevin said, it was truly a pleasure to have you here tonight. And, this topic is I wouldn't know Kevin if it wasn't for this topic, to be honest, right? Like, we met in the human service field. We bonded through trying to be of service, along with sports and a bunch of other things that we have a lot of things in common outside of just this, but this is our passion. So to be able to sit down and have an in-depth conversation and hopefully just spread some awareness on what is going on, and more importantly, how you make me just think the world is full of endless possibilities, and whatever you want to do, you can do if you set your aim on it and continue to just not take no for an answer. So
have that passion to push through the hard
Don't forget
times.
the passion.
And the genuineness, right? The last thing I want to say is it kind of clicked to me. Everything you've talked about is built off these really personal relationships. Oh, I'm still in touch with the person from McNair. Oh, I'm still in touch with my elementary school. Oh, I'm so, and how life is made from these relationships. It's everything. And you're a living testament to the importance of meaningful relationships and continuing to give back what was freely given to you. So for that, I say thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank
Falling
you.
Up Podcast.